Hello again, the internet, and welcome to part 2 of making the LETH. This is cutting, welding, grinding, putting the whole thing together. I'm not grabbing that with my bare hands. Now this is a bit of a long one again. This is over 8 hours of footage I've edited down to under 20 minutes, so stick with it. I think it's pretty neat. We're about to go super speed here in just a little bit, so the audio's gonna drop back a bit. So when you speed this up, it's basically just weaponized static. And here we go! Ooh, that's fast. I've cut a few pieces that are the sort of connecting parts that'll form the rest of the handles and the backing of the blade and all of that. And now I just need to level everything out from the forging so I can start getting it welded together. I don't have to take it down to a perfect, finish shine here, especially because the welds are going to have to get ground, and if I grind it too far now, I'm just honestly wasting time. As you watch me work on this piece here, just watch that grinder wheel disintegrating. You can see all the bits on my arm, you can see how that edge just rounds off. I think they were really too soft. Pretty cheap wheels that came with a pretty cheap grinder. Still, though, they worked well for profiling these edge pieces, getting them nice and matched up and as identical as possible, which really helps out with the measurements when you have nice symmetrical pieces. This is the back of the handle, that very first piece I forged out. Again, just flattening it down. Had to go back and put a clamp on that vise. It was trying to get away from me. It's really nice being able to work outside like this. Much cooler than the forge inside the shop. Even if I wanted to be working without a shirt on this because it was too hot, I wouldn't have. Otherwise I end up with metal just sort of in my entire belly. I'm really starting to understand why you see so many people take this guard off. It gets in the bloody way. Yeah, that's the point. But I really like my hands in the shape they are now. Yeah, it's like riding a bike. You don't really need that helmet until you land on your head. Ask me how I know. It's because I landed on my head once, but I was wearing a helmet, so hey. This is very polished. These two edges ground back really well so I can really get into the middle and weld the whole way through. I really want to make sure that the welds go nice all the way through so there's no problem with the heat treat, there's no cracks, there's nothing. If nothing else, because it would just waste a whole lot of time, man, if I, started doing the finish grinding and I kept finding all these voids and had to keep going back and re-welding and re-grinding and re-welding. That would just be awful if that happened. Eyes peeled there. Note the table is starting to catch on fire underneath this. It's a very thin piece of metal and is helping. Fortunately, I laid down a sacrificial top on top of this table before I got started. It's just a piece of ply. Looking at these now, they don't look nearly as pretty as they did then. But those were solid. Yep. Oh, wow, that's warm. Can only just barely hold on to this clamp, even with the gloves on, but yep. Whoopsie. Need some more welding clamps. All metal. So if I keep using those, there'll be only metal left, so, 6 in one, half dozen the other. Can never have enough clamps. They do make special welding clamps, I just don't own any. Now, since this is the first, weld on this project like this, and one of my first gas welds ever, after I finish this one, I'm going to grind it all down and check it as best I can to make sure it's really solid. In this case, that means seeing what it sounds like. Theory being is that if it rings nice and clearly, it's one solid piece. If there's two notes, or it sounds very dull, there's probably a crack in it that's muting it. Sounds solid. Yeah. Of course, I have no reference for what sounds right, but it seems pretty straightforward. Now it's just assembling the rest of this jigsaw. I've got all these pieces cut, but I gotta grind each one in to fit nice and perfect, and then grind back all the corners and grind away any scale where I'll be welding. Okay, got that piece fitted. Now I gotta cut this, and that whole side should more or less fit together nice and flat. Really is the most satisfying jigsaw puzzle in the world. When you finish it, you get a sword. Okay. I'm gonna do the same thing for the other side. Cut all those pieces. Add that extra little bit right there that's needed. And then be back after that. Okie doke. We're in pretty good shape. This is definitely working well as a very narrow welding table. My work surface has hardly caught on fire at all today. It's just a big piece of C-channel. I think that came from my old job. It was in the way, left over from the whatever. Anyway. Yeah, clamp there would have been a good idea. Looks pretty cool even at this stage. It's looked cool this whole time. So now I'm finally getting the high carbon steel welded on here. I've never done that before, so I'm a little nervous about it. High carbon steel when welded can crack if it cools too quickly. Fortunately, I'm using a gas torch, and that just dumps so much heat in, it's really not a concern. Once you get in the groove of laying down those beads, they are just so satisfying. You have so much control when you have heat in one hand and your filler rod in the other. I really need to get a TIG. One clamp. Two clamp. Honestly surprised that was the only clip I had of me losing something. It's just the rest of it must have happened off camera because that happened way more than once. It's over here-ish. Hi, Rachel. Hi, Pusheen. Love you too. I'm gonna try and get a close-up shot here. As long as I'm angling the flame this way, and the camera's here, it should be okay. It will reflect heat out. I'm not going to do this for very long, but most of it should go that way. Hopefully. I'll watch to see if the phone case catches on fire. I put a filter on the camera here. It's from a welding goggles that came with the kit. I have a nicer pair of glasses I'm wearing that do the same amount of protection. Unfortunately, it just white balanced it all away, and since I was using my cell phone, and my cell phone didn't have the ability to affect that setting, oh well. I was really hoping you'd be able to see more of, the actual bead process, because it's really quite cool. If nothing else, it probably provided a little bit more heat protection for the phone, which is good. The heat cone of death that comes off of that thing is anywhere between 1 foot and 2 feet long, so you think everything's fine, but you point it off in some direction, and all of a sudden the wires on my wire brush are melting on the other side of the table, and I go, oh. Oops. This is the last big piece to get welded up before I address the handles. And then after the handles, it all gets welded together. You see me tacking it so that it doesn't move too much. And you might notice I didn't tack it all the way to the edge there. That's because you can see there's a little bit of a bend. The rest of it was all lined up. So I welded the rest of it together first. And then you'll see me heat the end there and bend it into place before welding it together. Pretty straightforward. This is also leaving out all of the many, many, many times that I was keeping the nozzle too close to the metal and a little bit of slag would get on there and would pop with about the same sound as a .22 rifle going off. And I would jump up 6 feet in the air, turn everything off, walk away from it, go, okay, it's not going to explode, right? Because at the time, I hadn't really used the torch very much. And there isn't really a resource for what sounds mean you should run away. Acetylene is scary. Just a little final touch up there. As I was welding it all, it keeps shifting its size gently, because the heat warpage gets locked in by the weld, and you gotta keep tweaking it. If I knew what I was doing a little bit more with that, I probably wouldn't have had such an issue with it. It wasn't too bad. So here I'm just making an ellipse shape, a pattern. I'm going to cut one out and use that to lay out all 3 handles, doing some very careful measurements to make sure it is, nice and symmetrical and even and all of that, same angle. I was originally going to cut this out with the angle grinder, but it just didn't work. I could not get it in there. So, use the torch. I have a cutting head. Not very good with it, but I got better as I went, and it was still faster. So much faster than any other way. And when you see me have to remove it physically like that, that's because I didn't do it quite right. That one right there, yeah, it just fell right down. Very satisfying. I'm cutting in the lines here because as soon as the heat of the torch touches it, the Sharpie just disappears. Well in advance of where I'm cutting. I've got a quench bucket down there at my feet, catching any bits of slag and the pieces of metal as they come off. It's a very good idea. Look at that pretty weld. Covered in slag and flux and crap, but it was pretty to me. Something in there that's like it's a weld only a grinder could love. Yeah. Getting into the final stretch here. Just gotta clean this up, get it flat so I can weld the 2 pieces together. And before I do that, I do want to see if I can clean up the inside of these handles as much as possible, because I have no idea how I was going to do that otherwise. They want to be stuck filing them completely. Okay. Hemming, hawing, etc., etc. I think it's time to weld this together. This is really exciting. Damn right it is. Once this is all welded together and cooled, I can pick the whole thing up for the first time and get an idea of what this is going to feel like. It's worth the wait. The problem is, right about then is when I started kind of wanting to keep it instead of delivering it when completed. And it only gets worse as it gets more and more finished. Ah, well. There's an example. A little bit of slag on the end, making the flame come out all wrong, and sometimes you can just sort of tap it and it'll come off. That time it blew out the flame. And after this is all welded up, in the next episode, I'm going to be grinding it all flat and, well, fixing the profile and discovering all the problems that I will then have to go back and fix. I don't know how much of that I'm going to show or just gloss over. And then after that comes the real problem, the real hard part of this whole build. How do you heat treat this thing? It's half again as wide as the widest part of my forge and more than twice as long. I'm just going to go ahead and assume you can hear that audio. The ice cream truck's coming by, and it has the creepiest track that it loops that I've ever heard from an ice cream truck. Now, this all sounds fine, but is it just, when it loops, it stops for a second and it just goes, hello? I just, something about that. Wait for it. Here it comes. Ugh.